After the success of movies like The Witches of Eastwick and The Craft, witches had very much moved out of the horror genre. Through the late 90s and early 2000s, friendly witches filled the small screen in TV shows like Buffy, Charmed, and Sabrina the Teenage Witch. It seemed nobody was frightened of the occult anymore.
You shamed me.
However, towards the end of the 2000s, filmmakers started looking back to the heyday of occult horror. After 2 decades of glossy, starry horror movies, something started to change. Suddenly, retro fashion, 16mm grainy film, and synthy scores started seeping their way back into the genre. 2 movies in particular drew on the popular grindhouse movies of the 70s and early 80s, and with that, they brought the creeping, insidious dread of witchcraft and the occult back to mainstream horror. Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of the occult, and we discuss 2 nostalgic occult gems, Drag Me to Hell and House of the Devil. Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the evolution and history of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres one series at a time. We are currently in the middle of exploring the evolution of the occult in horror cinema, and this is part 17, in which, as the intro suggested, we are going to be looking at 2 movies from about 10 years ago, Sam Raimi's Drag Me to Hell and Ty West's House of the Devil. Please be warned, these will both be spoilerific reviews. If you haven't seen these 2 films, they are both so much fun. Go away and give them a watch before listening to our discussions. Let's get straight into it then. Later in this episode, I'm going to be joined by filmmaker Kat Davis to discuss all things House of the Devil, but in the first half of this episode, it's time to talk Drag Me to Hell. Joining me to discuss all things Drag Me to Hell, one of my original Evolution of Horror co-hosts. He was last here discussing The Cabin in the Woods with me, and he's back. It is my great pleasure to welcome back to the podcast, Rob Watts.
Hello, Mike.
Hello. How have you been?
Very well, thanks.
Good,
yeah,
good.
Very well. Watching lots of horror films, following the podcast as it goes.
Excellent.
Glad to be back.
You watched The Lighthouse this week, didn't you? We were just discussing.
I did.
What did you think?
I thought it was very, very impressive.
Yeah.
Pretty insane.
It is insane, and it's kind of a film that made me feel a bit seasick and a bit nauseated, but I guess that's what it's supposed to do. That's a good thing.
So, yeah. Lots of heavy rain, lots of R's and E's and
some
just
great fart jokes.
Some great fart jokes, some great food jokes.
Yes.
Lobster. I loved it. Yeah. And it looks stunning.
It really does. It really does. I loved it.
And that noise.
Yeah. It reminded me a bit of a Razorhead in that kind of like constant jarring like drone noise.
The droning,
in the background.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we are talking about kind of occult movies and witchy movies and satanic movies and all that kind of stuff this series. Are you in any way a kind of, or have you ever been a kind of spiritual or religious person? Or does any of that kind of, do you believe in any of that stuff, and does it affect you in that way?
It's interesting. So I was raised a Catholic.
Same.
Quite loose Catholic, went to Catholic school and all of that. I mean, this is maybe the big thing, is that I didn't realise that at Mass, as a Catholic, you're supposed to genuinely believe the blood and body are what you're eating.
Yes.
So the bread turns into the body.
Yes.
The wine turns into the blood. I thought it was just a metaphor, like in Church of England, but it's not. And the fact that that is such a crucial part of being Catholic, I think probably shows just how little I was sort of devoted to it.
Yeah.
So no, I grew up raised in a Catholic way, but never kind of thinking much about it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that ever extended to my movie watching, film watching. If a film is doing its job, whatever the enemy or the villain or the bad guy is, if it's scary, it's scary.
Yeah. You don't have to believe in ghosts to find ghost stories scary,
exactly,
I suppose. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And so, the devil is the devil.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
We've not really covered anything in the sort of early 2000s because it does feel like the occult movies kind of died away a bit. We had like lots of kind of more comedy ones. We had kids movies like The Witches and The Craft in the early 90s and The Witches of Eastwick. And then horror kind of went to a bit of a different place. I think we were into sort of torture porny stuff and Eli Roth and whatever else. and then it's definitely come back in this last decade, and it probably started about where we're talking. 2009 with Drag Me to Hell, and then 2010 with House of the Devil. They're both quite interesting, a kind of new direction in horror in some ways.
Completely. I mean, it's the year that you had the Cabin Fever sequel.
Oh yeah.
The sort of third and fourth installments of various franchises. There was a Saw that year.
Yeah.
The Collector, I think, that sort of torture porn slasher thing. Various, other just boring sequels of torture porn things. And then this one kind of stands out as being not the same.
Yeah, and I remember even at the time seeing it in the cinema and thinking it was quite a breath of fresh air of a film. This isn't like anything else that's usually coming out in cinemas at the moment.
Completely.
Yeah.
And we hadn't seen Sam Raimi doing anything like this for a long time.
Yes.
I remember seeing it at the cinema. I think I was at university. I took my friend Natasha, who I used to do a film show on university radio.
Oh, no way. Amazing.
Which was great. Shout out to Natasha. We went to see it, and I've always remembered this because I came out thinking that was the funniest thing I've seen in ages.
Yeah.
And she came out thinking that was terrifying.
Oh,
I was like,
what a great split in reactions.
How does a film do that? Yeah.
This is one of the very, 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 very few films that I think pulls that off, and we'll get into it, but I think pulls off comedy and horror in almost equal measure, which I love. And I think that's such a hard... We've talked about it before, but it's such a hard thing to get right.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. Let's talk about Drag Me to Hell then, from 2009.
Mr. Jacks, I was wondering if you'd made any decision regarding the assistant manager's position.
It's between Stu and yourself.
Stu Rubin, the new guy?
Stu's someone who's not afraid to make the tough decisions.
I'm perfectly capable of making the tough decisions.
I'll let you know as soon as I decide, okay?
Will you help me? Please.
Okay. We have an elderly woman asking for an extension on her mortgage payment. We would have to throw her out of her house.
We've already granted her 2 extensions. It's a tough decision. Your call.
Another extension is out of the question.
Where will I live?
I'm really sorry.
Never have I begged for anything, but now I humble myself
Mrs. Ganesh,
before you.
please.
I beg you.
Please let go. Please let go. Security!
You shame me. Soon it will be you who comes begging to me.
Someone has cursed you. He's the Lamia, the most feared of all demons. For the first 3 days, the spirit torments its victims. After that, it will come to take you.
Take me where?
To burn in hell for eternity.
So the story is, you've got Alison Lohman. She plays Christine, who's a loan officer, and she is trying to get a promotion. And in order to prove that she's worthy of the promotion, she thinks she has to, show her grit and turn down people who perhaps need an extra extension on their loan or something. In walks Mrs. Garnush,
yes,
an old, creepy-looking lady, with a foggy eye and gnarled teeth and nails and things like that. And she's looking for a loan after having had 3 loans already. And Christine, who's a very nice person, it seems, decides to say,
no.
Sorry, you can't have a loan. Making Mrs. Garnush feel like shit.
Yeah.
And ultimately putting a curse on her, meaning she's going to die in 3 days. That's the simple.
That's it.
That's the simple story.
That's it.
Yeah.
And then as the kind of the what do you call it? The kind of fortune teller tells her later on in the film that like this demon that's going to kill you will make you suffer for 3 days and then kill you at the end of the 3 days. So we then just spend the next 3 days, don't we, with her kind of being scared shitless by this demon.
Oh yeah, 3 days of pure just horror set pieces.
Yeah, it's so good. So first of all, then, I mean, you mentioned you came out of the cinema, you thought it was one of the most funny horror films you'd seen. What is that kind of? Is that still your thought now, rewatching it? What do you think of the film? Are you a fan of it?
I do like it a lot. It's a very fun film. It's like a roller coaster. We've said it about many different kinds of films.
Yes.
But it really is. You strap in and you just let it wash over you.
Yes.
And it's fun and it's gross and it's funny and it does have lots of jump scares as well.
Yes.
And some terrifying moments. It's just, you're just taken all over the place with it.
Yeah.
And I love it.
I love it too. It is one of those cinema experiences for me that I will always remember. I saw it as a student as well. There's about 5 where I just remember these horror films being the most fun to watch with an audience. Like Get Out is one of them for me.
Yeah.
Things like Ready or Not at Fright Fest.
That was brilliant.
I remember seeing Final Destination 2, I think, in the cinema with friends as a teenager, and having that same, this kind of like screaming and laughing and cheering. And Drag Me to Hell was definitely, I saw it in probably the same as you, like in a very studenty environment, and people were just having a blast, like really laughing, jumping, screaming, grossed out. I mean, it's just like, literally throws everything at you, doesn't it? From beginning to end.
Whatever you can think of, yeah. It probably ends up in Christine's mouth.
Yes.
Yeah, poor Christine.
Poor Christine. Let's talk about Christine. What do you think of her as this kind of heroine of this story, and Alison Lohman and the way she plays her?
Well, firstly, I love Alison Lohman.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a program on Nickelodeon growing up called Tucker. Now, I think it lasted for like 1 series or something, but she
was the girl next Tucker.
Yeah.
I did not know that. Seth Green's girlfriend.
Yeah. So she was like an aspiring actress dating Seth Green, and Tucker fancied her. And it was kind of like, it was a sort of American Pie light for kids.
It was such a good show.
Wasn't it?
Yeah. You had Seth Green playing himself. He was like the famous movie actor Seth Green in it. Yeah.
So it's always nice. I always found it nice to see her in something.
Yeah.
She's not in a lot, and I don't think she's really acted much since.
No.
But I think she's great. And in this film, she's really good as playing the kind of slightly insecure country girl who's moved to the cities, trying to impress her boyfriend's parents, win a promotion. She's just a nice person who happens to do one, you assume, you don't see much of her life before the bad things begin, but it seems like she's quite nice until she does one thing, and that she sort of, it's not really very fair.
It's so unfair. Like, that's the thing. I think, how many 99% of horror movies are in some way about a character, usually a woman, being punished for something. Like, that is, it tends to be what they're about. But this feels particularly harsh, what she goes through, because I think I empathize with her from the beginning. Even though she does this horrible thing and turns down this woman's loan, you still can understand why she does it, and why she's basically being treated badly in this workplace compared to the man, and she's trying to prove her worth, and she clearly isn't a bad person, but she's having to sell her soul. And I think, a lot of people have different interpretations of this film we'll get into as we go on, whether or not any of them are meant by Sam Raimi. But I think I get from it that it's quite an interesting snapshot of the credit crunch, and like that kind of financially what was going on in America, and the kind of struggle for money, and banks, and the way they treated people, and that kind of thing,
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, when it came out was the middle of the housing crisis.
Yeah.
I don't know that was ever Raimi's intention, because I think he wrote it with his brother, like he does with a lot of his stuff.
Yeah.
But they'd written like a short story about 20 years before.
Yeah.
And finally, after he did all his Spider-Mans, got round to being like, maybe we should just go and do that.
Oh, I'm so glad he did.
Yeah, but like, I mean, it is crazy how timely it became.
Yeah. I don't think it was intentional. I've got a feeling that Sam Raimi does not care about that kind of stuff.
I don't think so. And there's all sorts of things within the film which we'll talk about.
Yes.
You just think it's just a B-movie horror film.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of substance.
It is a pure roller coaster ride of fun and grossness, isn't it? I think. Sam Raimi, I mean, we talked briefly about Evil Dead, probably, and Ash versus the Evil Dead when you were here on the Zombie Show.
Yeah.
Are you a fan of Raimi's work in general, of him as a director?
Yes. Everything I've seen.
Yes.
I still haven't seen Army of Darkness. I'm very sorry, everyone.
Nah. It's not, I mean, you're not missing much.
Yeah. I think I just love that blend of comedy and horror, and even his more serious stuff, there's still plenty of humor there if you want it, and this is kind of the extreme end of being hilarious.
I love it so much.
Scary. It's pretty much on a par with Ash vs Evil Dead, where that kind of went well beyond what Evil Dead 2 was trying to do, and went all out gross. Yeah, and that's a good place to be, I think. You know, scary and gross and funny is a good combination. I'm there for it.
It's one of the most fun movies in recent years, I would say. And like, it feels, I was saying this to someone the other day, like it feels to me more like this is the Evil Dead remake more than the Evil Dead remake. Because the Evil Dead remake, I know it has a lot of fans, but I think it kind of sucked away everything that made the Evil Dead films what they were, like that kind of like fun style that it had. This movie, even though it has an entirely different story, it feels more to me like, obviously it feels more faithful to the Evil Dead than the new Evil Dead did,
even down to the transformations of, there's a seance scene, and when they get possessed, they look exactly like Evil Dead.
Yes, it was almost like a little homage to his own films there, that scene, wasn't it?
So it is, it's Raimi, and that's as much as you can say, really.
So good. It's an obvious question, but how would you describe Raimi? What do we mean by it's Raimi?
Oh, that's quite an interesting question. I guess in my mind, it's sort of overly cartoony.
Yes. Cartoony is a great
horror,
word. Yeah.
You know, there's lots of fluid, you know, of all kinds. Especially if you watch Ash vs. Evil Dead.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that takes it to the extreme. And wide eyes and caricatures and just big horror tropes that they're just there to fulfill a purpose, and just that's it, really.
Yeah, it's kind of broad. I mean, I think it was Chris Hewitt that said on the podcast that he kind of, his films are more reminiscent of something like The Three Stooges than of like horror.
Absolutely. Slapstick.
Yes, slapstick, silent cinema, even cartoons. Like it's almost like you're watching like Sylvester, like Roadrunner, like Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner.
Specifically, there is a scene with an anvil in this film. There's a scene with an anvil in a shed, and all you can think is, oh yeah, where's Wile E. Coyote?
Exactly.
Absolutely slammed by the...
And who doesn't find those cartoons fun at all times? That's the thing. Like this is like a live action, gory version of one of those cartoons.
Yeah, completely.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's what Bruce Campbell was. He was that type of character in the Evil Dead franchise as well, wasn't he?
Well, that's it. I suppose with Evil Dead, you have this big-chinned hero, you know, doesn't mean to be there, but he's been placed in this position, and he is larger than life.
Yeah.
Christine, likewise, is, unbeknownst to her, put into this position of danger.
Yes.
She's not quite as cartoony, though.
No. And also, I wonder whether that adds something. Like, what I find what makes this film funnier is that she is playing it like she's in a dead straight horror film almost. Like, she takes it very seriously.
She does.
Even though what's happening to her is so absurd the whole way through.
That's very true. But that really works, because when she's scared, we're scared.
Yes.
Even if that's an old lady gumming her face.
Oh my God.
We'll get to that scene in a second.
We've got to get to that. And I think, let's talk about Mrs. Ganush. And I think, you know, we're introduced from the second we're introduced to her. I think the way that the film treats her is that we don't really feel that sorry for this woman. I kind of feel like Sam Raimi sets her up as being this kind of like grotesque monster from the beginning almost.
Well, yeah, I guess if there is a demon eventually, but she starts off as, she looks like a monster for a start.
Yes. They make her look as monstrous as possible,
they do.
Don't they?
And she's not that horrible. She does gross things when she's like waiting and talking.
Yes.
Mrs.
Ganush.
Mrs. Ganush, the bank is informing you of their intent to repossess her property at 325 Brandon Street today.
But this is my home for 30 years. And I make every payment until the sickness took my eye.
As soon as you see her, the first thing you see are her nails tapping on the desk, and her nails are so grotesque. It's like looking at something like Nosferatu or something from the second you see her. I think, you know, it's like, she is this horrible monster.
Yeah, she's a device in my eyes. She's not. She is much more than that.
I mean, that's the thing. I know that, you know, already 10 years on, I think there are elements of this film that maybe have dated, and I know a lot of people have called this film up on its kind of slightly insensitive, I suppose, portrayal of what they call gypsy people in this film. whether we call that, where she's Hungarian, I think, in the film,
I think,
isn't she?
Apparently, if you pause it, you can see somewhere at the funeral scene that she's Hungarian.
Yes.
I mean...
But whether it's generically kind of a portrayal of, travelling communities or whatever it might be, I do agree that, yes, Sam Raimi absolutely just portrays them as these, monstrous characters, essentially, in this. They're all mystical and evil in some way. And that, I think that's fair enough that people have a problem with that, to be fair.
I guess so, yeah. I mean... I watched it and I was like, it's just an old lady. She's put a curse on someone.
She's a wicked witch, basically.
Yeah, I didn't think anything more of that. This is a B-movie horror. We just need a reason for her to get a curse.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, there are a million ways you can do it, but they went with that.
Exactly, yeah. It is. We've seen it time and time again in films, whether it's kind of Caribbean people and voodoo magic, whatever it might be. There's always going to be something like that where there is a group that is represented as an other. I guess it's an easy device for filmmakers a lot of the time.
I guess so.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it was a device.
Yes.
And okay, maybe we should be moving past old lady traveling person is bad.
Yeah.
For me, it was just, she's just the reason she gets a curse. Basically.
Exactly, and that is exactly what she is. She's a means to get this story on the roll, on the road. And she is really scary. The way they make her teeth look. I mean, let's talk about I think the best moment of the film,
right?
Which is the fight in the car park.
In the car. So this is when she first. So before she's been cursed, she finishes work. She goes down to the car park.
Yeah.
She sees Sam Raimi's car, which is in all of his films.
Yes.
The yellow, whatever it is. And she's like, that looks creepy.
It is creepy too.
Oh, yeah.
He manages to make a car look very creepy and ominous.
He does. Yeah. So she sees that, and then out of nowhere, Mrs. Ganush.
Oh my God. What an incredible reveal when you see that sort of handkerchief and it's sort of blowing in the wind and the camera follows it round. And as the camera pans round, we then see that in the foreground, Mrs. Ganush is sat in the back seat.
You shamed me.
That is what I love about it is that it's not like a big jump scare moment. It's like a slow, gradual reveal as we see her face kind of come into the light.
Right there.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
People in the back seat, good trope, good horror trope, always scary.
Always good.
And that is perfectly done, isn't it?
Oh, I love it so much. That kind of slow reveal and then that fight, which is, again, we're back to kind of pure cartoon violence here.
This could never happen in real life at all. So I think, what does she do? She attacks her with a stapler. She tries to strangle Christine, I think. Mm-hmm. So then Christine reaches and finds a staple.
A staple gun.
Is she carrying a staple gun in her bag?
Who knows? She staple guns her in the
forehead,
face. Yeah,
her face. And then what else? Then she somehow.
It's all stationary, isn't it?
She shoves a ruler in her mouth.
And then Mrs. Ganush coughs it up and it kind of it shoots at the window, cracking the window. Amazing. And then there is the horrible moment where Christine drives the car, stops it, and then her head, Mrs. Ganush's head hits the dashboard, her teeth come out. So then she's kind of gummy. And then Mrs. Ganush leaps at her and, like you said, puts her gums kind of over her face.
Yeah, over her chin and into her mouth. This is so gross.
This is something that is just inherently gross, I think. Me and Louise Blaine talked about in The Witches, how when you're a kid, how much you hate this idea of old women. It sounds like I'm very anti-old woman. I'm not. But this is a thing that you get when you're a child, that horrible fear that women are going to kiss you on the mouth or on the face. That horrible thing that mums do or old ladies do where they lick a tissue and wipe your face. All of that kind of horrible kind of abject stuff that you grow up hating. This kind of taps into all that, doesn't it?
The far end of all that. Yeah, what if someone wanted to, gum your face? What is Mrs. Ganush trying to achieve? At this point, it's hard to tell. She hasn't cursed her, so she Where is her energy coming from?
It's ridiculous. That's the thing. Like you said, what is she trying to achieve here? This is where the Sam Raimi is just absolutely not really caring too much about story or character or what they're really trying to do to each other. He's just like throwing the most gross stuff imaginable at us, isn't he?
Yeah,
it's amazing.
It's completely nonsensical, actually, if you think about it. She could have stolen a button at any point, but instead she decides to try and I don't know what she's trying to do.
Is she trying to kill her? I guess she's just in a rage, Mrs. Ganush, at this point, and is just doing what she can to hurt her or trying to kill her, maybe. But yeah, incredible fight. I really think
it's a brilliant fight.
I don't know for me whether the film ever matches up to this scene again in the rest of the film. Like, not that I don't enjoy the rest of the film, but this is peak.
That's the big set piece. There are a few smaller set pieces which are just as gross.
Yeah.
But that's the scene that sets everything up. So you have the weird grossness of the attack, and then she grabs the button off Christine's jacket.
Yes.
And puts a curse on her. I can't remember what she says, but
it's something to do with the Lamia. The demon is the Lamia.
I read Ted Raimi said something about how they were like, we just need a demon
word
of some kind.
Yeah.
I was like, I think the Lamia, the name of the Lamia appears in various, horror films and cultures and things. So that could be a generic demon.
Why not?
They really didn't do that much research.
No, not interested in that kind of stuff. No. It doesn't matter, does it?
This isn't more of the more specific.
No.
Occult films we've talked about so far.
And we've talked about how, exactly, with certain films like The Craft, they actually even had a kind of consultant on set that was kind of advising, what is real and what isn't in terms of, what you should do in these rituals and everything. I'm not sure Sam Raimi cared. This is like generic evil, isn't it? Basically?
Completely, yeah. And it's funny because Evil Dead, what is that?
Exactly. It's exactly the same.
Evil.
It's exactly the same.
And this is just another guise of just something evil.
Exactly. It's means to an end. One of the things I always think about with Sam Raimi is the camera work. Like, that's the thing that screams out at me with the Evil Dead movies, is those amazing camera techniques where the camera would like zoom through the woods and would go upside down and all of that kind of thing. Is that kind of present in Drag Me to Hell for you as well? Like, do you notice the camera work?
I think you do, in as much as, if you know you're going to see a Sam Raimi film, it feels, and you're asking me what's a Sam Raimi film, obviously how could I forget the Dutch angles, the crazy just camera work. Yeah. It's all over the place.
It's the biggest influence on somebody like Edgar Wright, isn't it? I mean, Edgar Wright always cites Sam Raimi as his biggest influence. Yeah.
And it's just topsy-turvy and
I love it.
Weird angles.
It feels alive, doesn't it?
It really does.
It's always moving.
Exactly. And that kind of feeds the whole roller coaster ghost train idea.
Yes.
Like, it just doesn't stop.
Yes.
And you're going up and down and round and round and you're seeing all this stuff and it's like,
Yeah, nauseating.
I love it. And it's funny because he's worked with the same DP for most of his career.
Yeah.
Peter Deming, who did Evil Dead 2, which is,
the best.
It's just the best.
Yeah.
But also, this guy, he's a legend. This is the second film I've spoken on the pod about that he's DP'd. The other one was Cabin in the Woods, which, we love that film.
What a film.
A lot. But he's also done Screams 2 to 4. And a load of David Lynch stuff. So, how did we not know this?
Oh my God.
He did all of Twin Peaks: The Return. He did Mulholland Drive, Lost Highway. It's just like...
Wow.
This
quite an
guy is
eclectic
amazing.
mix, like quite different styles,
Interesting,
really.
yeah. So the assured kind of long takes of Twin Peaks: Return.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing like this film.
That's amazing.
So he's a versatile guy.
Love it.
But he's great. He's good taste in jobs for a start.
He really does.
Directors.
He really does.
But he knows what he's doing.
He knows what he's doing.
I don't know how many genius ideas they had for ways to film Drag Me to Hell, like they did with Evil Dead, but
they must have had, I suppose, easier ways out now with more money and CGI and stuff, right? It's probably not quite as much like, we've got to attach this camera to this rig in the woods
or this plank of wood.
Exactly.
We can just put the camera on the floor and point it upwards.
Exactly. Or put something in a blue screen or something.
But that's how it feels like a Sam Raimi film.
Yes,
Completely.
absolutely.
Love it.
A dark spirit has come upon you.
What do you mean?
Please, did you blaspheme the dead while visiting a graveyard?
No.
Did you play with the Ouija board or consort with those who practice the black art?
All right, take it easy, man. Come on.
Clay. No, I didn't.
Perhaps someone has cursed you.
And then interestingly, so she gets this curse put on her, which is, in 3 days you will die. So it's probably a good time to talk about the connection between this and Night of the Demon, right? So Jacques Tourneur's Night of the Demon, which was based on M.R. James casting the runes, but it's the same kind of story. It's the same kind of setup.
Yeah, I mean, basic setup. So so
bare bones.
The book was like, you've been cursed, you've got 3 days, and you what do they have to do?
They have to pass the runes on.
Pass the curse on, or give the curse back.
No, pass it on to somebody else, and they have
Unwittingly.
they have to accept it willingly. But yes, they can be unwitting, but they have to accept it as a gift. You can't just plant it on them, sort of thing. Yeah.
So Night of the Demon, he's trying to.
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
She has to pass the button on. It's the same as the ring, though, right? It's the passing on the videotape. It's you will die in 7 days curse. Yeah, it's such a good device, I think.
It's a great device, and it means you've got whatever time period you've given yourself.
Yeah, you're given a ticking clock.
Whatever you like
exactly.
to scare the shit out of someone.
I think it's a really great narrative device because you've got this then like forward propulsion of like, right, you've got this time limit to survive and creepy stuff is going to happen on the way, and you know that it's going to all come to an end, and you've got to beat the clock kind of thing, which is great.
So Christine knows that she's got 3. She knows she's been cursed, so she has to go and see some seer guy, and he's like, yep, it's the Lamia, you've got 3 days. What did he tell her? He tells her they has to pass the button on because she is trying to track down Mrs. Garnish after that.
Yeah, I think this is the thing, isn't it? Christine as a character doesn't want to have to curse another human being in order to survive. So I think she tries every means necessary first, doesn't she, to survive it. First of all, she's kind of in denial about it. Then she tries to approach Mrs. Ganush, but Mrs. Ganush has died.
So here we go. Here's gross scene number 2.
Which one is that?
So she tries to approach Mrs. Ganush, but she's dead.
Oh yeah.
So she goes to the house where she's living. And meets the family who are at her wake.
Yes.
And it's only a short scene, but she turns up. Mrs. Ganush is there, lying in an open coffin.
Yes.
She trips over, falls onto the coffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Ganush falls on top of her and spills embalming fluid into her mouth.
There's a lot of stuff that goes into her mouth.
So much stuff going in her mouth.
And again, this is a really interesting theory that's been sparked online. There's been a few articles about it. That this film is really all about eating disorders. There is a setup at the beginning that Christine used to be overweight, right?
Yeah.
When she was young, and there's something like she was a farm girl, she was a country girl.
And there's a picture of her with a pig in her house.
Exactly.
And she, when she's stressed, she's eating all the ice cream.
Exactly.
She mentions that she doesn't eat lots.
There's a lot of food related stuff, and like we've already talked about how there's a lot of kind of like bodily grossness, and a lot of it involving the mouth and the teeth and things going into mouths or things coming out of mouths. There's flies that go into. There's a whole scene where they're eating a cake around a dinner table. Yep. Do you believe this theory? Do you think Sam Raimi had this in mind?
I mean, now we talk about it with all the individual instances, it seems like it might add up, but really, and here we go, here's a pun, I don't think it holds much weight.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, thanks.
Nice.
Thank you. No, I don't see that. No. She's insecure.
Yes.
That is, you see that from the very beginning when she's working on her accent.
Yes. It's a kind of classist thing to me more than her weight.
Well, you see when she goes to see her boyfriend, played by Justin Long.
Yes.
He's great.
He's always very good. Very good.
His rich parents, and she's worried because they're clearly going to judge her, and they do.
Yeah.
And then she starts to impress them before going a bit crazy.
Yeah.
But she's insecure, and that could be for any number of reasons. But that's the reason she gives this. She turns down Mrs. Gunnish is because she's insecure about various things. She's like, I've got to make a point, prove a point now.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of that relates to her feeling like she was fat.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's definitely there. Like, they deliberately obviously plant those seeds. You know, there's a moment in the wake when one of Mrs. Ganish's family is like, you used to be a fat girl, didn't you? Like, she actually says that to her. But again, I think it's more like you said, it's more that she's just this very insecure person. I think she's a person that is a bit hard done by, like whether it's because of her gender at work or whether it's because of her class or her upbringing or her weight. But I don't think it's true either. I don't think it's specifically a film about eating disorders. I think that's too
specifically.
That's reaching a bit too far with a lot of what the film is about. I think,
like we said before, I don't think Sam Raimi was thinking that much about subtext.
I think it's more that he's thinking about what are the grossest things you can put in a movie, and a lot of the grossest stuff is like food related stuff
and
that
ingestion.
goes. Yeah. Look at what everyone talks about as being one of the grossest movie scenes, which is Brain Dead, where they're eating the custard.
I mean, it is gross.
And it's like anything like that where you're eating or slurping or throwing stuff up, like that is the stuff that is and I think that's probably about as far as it went with Sam Raimi, where he's like, what would make this scene even nastier? If all of the embalming fluid went in her mouth. That's probably about it.
Think about all the things that go in her mouth. You've got, so there's the embalming fluid, there's Mrs. Ganush or the Lamia. I don't know who it's supposed to be in the scene in the shed where her entire arm goes in Christine's mouth.
So good.
What else is there? There's the maggots.
There's the bit when she throws up blood at work and her boss is like, did it go in my mouth?
Oh,
did it go in my mouth?
That's really horrible. Like, she's got the biggest like bloody nose ever, and then it sort of, she covers it up and then it comes out her nose, even squirts in his face. Actually, I saw, so the Blu-ray I watched is the unseen or unrated version.
Oh, nice.
And I was like, I want to see what the difference is. So I had a little look online. That's one of the scenes. So there's like an extra minute or something.
Oh,
longer,
really? Oh, wow.
Which isn't much.
I think I've just got the theatrical version. So
yeah, it's just not massively different. But that scene is a hell of a lot bloodier in the uncut version.
Nice.
Which is, that's what the film's about.
Oh, absolutely.
So give me more blood.
I love it. I love it. It's so much fun. And those are the moments that get people really kind of, squealing, laughing, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, it really is. What about, we talked a lot about on this podcast about the practical effects of 80s movies, particularly The Evil Dead. Everything was done practically. This film, obviously, it is quite CGI heavy, isn't it? What do you think of that?
Yeah, there is a bit too much of it because it's not great.
It's not good CGI, no.
There's the moment at the seance with the goat. It's comical anyway, but it really does look bad.
Yeah.
Greg Nicotero did the special effects, and he worked on Evil Dead 2. He started as Tom Savini's kind of number 2 or apprentice, and he does The Walking Dead. So he can do great effects.
Yeah.
And so I guess some of the practical effects are there.
Yeah.
But there is a heavy reliance on CGI, and even the very end scene, which we'll come to, is a little bit shonky.
Yeah, it is.
And even for 2009, I'm sure they could have done better back then.
This was Avatar year.
Yeah, exactly. But I guess it kind of all feeds into the fact this is a low budget.
And that it's cartoony, that it is literally cartoony in
That's very true.
film.
Yeah, we've actually used animation.
It's proper animation. I wish that it was practical. I do as well. I agree with you. I think that the CGI, some of it just, like the arm in the mouth, looks so bad.
It does look quite bad. Yeah.
There are moments of it that is that awful kind of dated CGI, which I wish. I think it just takes away from the grossness, which is a shame.
Yeah,
because it doesn't look like malleable, tactile.
You could have done the arm in the mouth scene practically.
Yeah.
I don't see how that would be too bad.
Exactly. And the blood too, like CGI blood is never good, because surely you could just throw a bunch of actual blood.
CGI blood? I thought that looked
I think there are moments when some of the blood is CGI, yeah. And again, it's just like, I guess it's an easier way to do some of these things, but that is a bit of a shame, especially when you know how good Sam Raimi is at throwing all of that practical stuff at the screen.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, some of the more effective scenes, so there's a scene where while Christine's being hunted by the Lamia, she's at home, and she runs up to her bedroom, locks herself in. There's 2 great jumps in this
amazing
scene.
jump scares.
She answers a phone, and Mrs. Ganush is right there, and screams. I jumped at that during the film.
Yeah.
And then when I was sort of making my notes and thinking about what we were going to talk about, I rewatched that scene because my notes said something like mobile phone scene.
Yeah.
I was like, is it like that scene in Nightmare on Elm Street 3 as a tongue or something?
Oh, yeah.
I was like, I can't remember. So I found it on YouTube. I was watching. I was like, I can't remember what happens. And I jumped out my skin again for just a 1 minute clip. I was like, wow,
The jump scares
Very
are
effective.
brilliant. He's really good at jump scares. The moment that always makes me jump is where she lies down in bed and then Mrs. Ganush is next to her in the bed. Because again, there's a kind of like slow reveal. Like you see her for a moment before the jump noise happens, and it's that kind of like it creeps up on you before it throws this jump noise at you. I love that. I love that about it. And it really, that's the thing. Like, you know, how much of this film actually scares you? Would you say?
10%.
Really?
Is that?
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know what I was supposed to.
No, I mean, I suppose like the moments that are supposed to be scary, do they land for you? Do they scare you?
Yeah. So the second jump in that bedroom scene is so the Lamia's at the door and you can see the hooves.
Oh, I love that.
As just a shadow.
There's some great stuff with shadows. Actually,
yeah, which sort of harkens back to the earlier days of Night of a Demon and stuff. And I suppose even what you do see of the demon, it's not dissimilar.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah,
but when it crashes through the window, you can't see anything, and Christine just gets thrown about the room into the wardrobe and stuff. That's terrifying. It
so
actually chilled me to the bone.
Yeah.
Like, you can't see what's going on. All you know is that you have no control over this.
Yeah.
And scary. Very scary.
And the other thing about it is that, like, it is the idea of, I think it was I mean, I suppose a lot of academics and people talk about this, but the different types of horror you get. And I know this is something that Mark Kermo did on his Secrets of Cinema horror episode, where you get the horror that is like the abject, so it's like the grossness, the repulsion, the blood, the guts, the gore, the stuff that repulses you,
which we have.
And you get a different type of horror, which is like the uncanny, which is like creepy images that you can't quite explain that creep you out, which I think this also has.
Also,
I do think that this film kind of does hit you with all the different types of horror that you want in a horror film. You know, it's got suspense, it's got jump scares, it's got blood, it's got guts, it's got creepy images, it's got a creepy character in Mrs. Ganush, you know.
It's a roller coaster ride of a film.
Yeah.
And you were talking about Night of the Demon, and that's kind of a sort of quiet, takes its time. And not to purposely, or maybe purposely, quote Selena Gomez. Yeah, I know.
Yes,
there's
good.
nothing subtle here. I think, and she says, what does she say? Just like the Battle of Troy, there's nothing subtle here.
Nice.
In her song Bad Life.
Oh, Selena.
She's got all the words. But this is just not subtle. There's nothing subtle about this film.
Nothing subtle about it, absolutely. And it's just like absolutely unapologetically so as well. That's what I love about it.
And that's Sam Raimi.
Yeah, to a
the
T.
core,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the other thing about it as well is that there's this like really, really uncomfortable kind of horror. The dinner party scene with the parents is so horrible because you really are rooting for Christine.
And she gets to a point, she starts talking, and the mum starts sort of really paying attention, thinking, oh, actually, maybe we've got you wrong. Yeah.
And then it's that's the thing. It's like, it's not just hitting you with scary stuff and gross stuff. It's also really like, oh, you poor cow. You know? It is like I feel so sorry for her throughout the whole thing.
That's a stressful situation. So she's got all this other death stuff going on, and she's trying to endure the painful awkwardness of trying to impress her boyfriend's parents.
And and I remember Bruce Campbell saying in an interview about The Evil Dead, he's like, Sam Raimi's kind of motto is characters must suffer. They are like, this is what we're here for, to put Ash and other characters through as much suffering as they can take. And that's exactly what, like, Christine just suffers from beginning to end. Like she has everything stripped away from her. She has to like sell all of her belongings in order to afford the seance, and like she's slowly like becoming this shell of a person as it goes on.
She kills her cat.
Which is also amazing.
Which is so sad. And actually that's a scene in the unseen version where I don't think in the theatrical cut you don't see very much. And then in the other version you get a completely different scene.
Oh, really?
Where you see her actually stabbing the cat, and there's just blood everywhere. And
God. That's so gross.
It's a lot worse. And I guess it kind of goes to highlight just how far she'll go. She kills the cat, but when you see it happening, you're like, oh man, she's desperate now.
And what do you think? We've touched upon it briefly then, but that seance scene is another kind of big set piece of the film, isn't it?
It is.
What do you think of that scene?
I don't love that scene.
I think it's the low point.
It kind of feels Tim Burton-y. Because you got a big gothic house and some... Even the music was a bit Danny Elfman at that point.
Well, I think he just teeters too far into just trying to do comedy, doesn't he, and not horror. Like, it is the moment when one of the guys sat around the table gets possessed and then kind of floats in the air and does like a dance. He does like a jig.
What is that? Like,
it's again, like you said at the very beginning, it's very evil. That scene particularly is so Evil Dead.
It really is, yeah.
But yeah, I don't know whether it needed it. I was kind of with it anyway. I don't know if I needed this like really super cartoony, wacky moment.
No, I feel like also maybe it's inconsistent. But I never quite know what she needs to do to get rid of the curse.
So I think that scene is supposed to be that you're passing the Lamia, the demon, into the goat, and then they were going to slaughter the goat to kill it. I think that was their first option.
That was the first option?
And then that failed. Basically, everything she tries throughout the film fails, doesn't it? Until eventually it's like, you've got to pass the button on to the horrible co-worker. But yeah, I think the point of that was that they were supposed to transfer the Lamia into the goat and then slaughter the goat. And then something happened.
Well, the goat got loose, didn't it?
The goat got loose and then bites the guy, and then it passes on to the guy, and that's how it kind of spreads.
But then they banish it, and it's like, oh, fine. But it's not gone.
No, and that's the thing. Like, everything she tries, she can't get rid of it.
And there's that scene in the car. We have not really spoken about her boyfriend, but he's there. He's just there all the time. He's supporting her. He takes time off work.
Yeah.
He gives her the $10,000 that needs dollars to do the seance, because she sold all her stuff, but it's not enough money.
And he's very skeptical about the whole thing, isn't he?
Oh, he's a psychologist,
and he's rightly so. Very much calling out the fortune teller on, okay, he might have been able to lie about this, or he might have been able to get about that. And it's funny how he still took your money, isn't it? And he's kind of the voice of reason, isn't he?
But he's the voice of reason, but he doesn't stop her. So he lets her. She has agency. He doesn't just immediately stop her doing what she feels she needs to do.
Yeah.
So he gives her the money. They go and do it, and you're just like, oh, that's not helpful either.
No.
And there's a scene where they're in the car, and she's got that button in an envelope, and you're like, here we go. This is a little twist.
I love it.
And all the papers get mixed up, and obviously she picks up the wrong envelope that has a rare coin in it, which has been mentioned briefly a few
He's got his stupid little coin collection.
Oh, why do we need to know about your coin collection? Right. This is the reason. And then so for about half an hour, you're like, she's not got the button in her pocket. No. So whatever happens, it's not...
It's a great little mean-spirited sting at the end, isn't it? Where it's like, oh, by the way, you gave this thing away. It's not the button. We think we've got our happy ending. Yeah, because she eventually decides she can't give it to this guy, even as horrible and vile as he is that she works with. She can't give it to him.
Oh, the other guy going for the assistant manager job, who tries to frame her.
And then in the end, she figures out that maybe she can give the button back to Mrs. Ganush, like in the grave. So there's that final sequence in the thunder and lightning and rain,
which is
she's drowning in mud.
Campy horror thing I've ever
We're into like Universal monster movies here, like Frankenstein, aren't we?
Oh, you know what? I'll just dig up Mrs. Ganush's grave. Oh, the fact that it's absolutely pouring with rain,
it's so good,
isn't going to stop.
And how quickly the grave just fills up.
She's just swimming in a grave with an old lady.
Again, it's amazing. Makes no sense, but it's brilliant.
But again, Christine goes through so much for that. Alison Nolan goes through so much filming this film.
She really does.
Fair play.
I know, amazing. It's a real tough performance, I think. It
really is.
She gives her the coin back, or what she thinks. She gives her the button back, what she thinks is the button. And then we think we get our happy ending. And there's that sweet moment when she's like, I'm going to buy this new coat and we're going to go away for our little weekend.
So I was trying to think. So this is a common thing that happens in Ring and stuff like that.
Exactly.
They think they've sorted it, and there's a moment of just quiet calm.
Yeah.
Everyone's getting on with their lives, and she's very happy about that dress that she decides to buy because she's happy. And I can treat myself, that's fine. And Clay's going to propose. That's the boyfriend.
Yes.
I think I said his name. And then it's just like...
and it all goes wrong. And he's like, oh, by the way, I found your button in my coin collection. Good. So good.
And then it just ends. And
amazing.
Then she's just like... She falls... And she's pulled under.
It's
like, just like that. You're like, oh.
And that's it. And then it just comes up massive letters, drag me to hell. It's so good.
I didn't think it would just stop there.
I love it. It's just pure B-movie madness.
Yeah.
I love it. I absolutely love it. I love how kind of just mean-spirited Sam Raimi is, where he's like, yep, she's just going to suffer and then die. The end. And
Basically,
that's it.
Yeah, it is. It's all just a setup, just to be like 3 days of pure
horror,
suffering, and
that's it.
That's kind of it. But fun for us.
Yeah, great fun. Great fun.
So much fun.
I love it. Do you think then that film still holds up sort of 10 years on? Would you still recommend it to people?
Yes, I guess with a caveat of, all these things that maybe position it as slightly out of its time.
Yeah. Elements of it have dated, maybe elements of it are slightly problematic, but it's still...
But mostly it's just a great, fun roller coaster ride of a horror film.
It just does what it says on the tin, doesn't it? I love it.
Like eyeballs and... eyeball in the mouth.
It's an eyeball in the mouth.
Just, I can't keep remembering little bits that just like, it's so gross and fun. I don't know how many times I'm going to say that. It just is, and it's great. I love it.
It's so good. It's so good.
I mean, I don't know how much this really relates to occult in the sense that many of the films this series have, but
yeah, I mean, that's what's so nice about occult films, is that they're so diverse, because obviously we've covered Night of the Demon, and this is the same as Night of the Demon. It's just tonally it couldn't be more different.
I love that. That's so great that you can have a similar premise and do two wildly different things.
Yeah, it's so good. I love that about it. And it is, of course it is about the occult. We've got pentagrams, we've got seances, we've got demons, devils, goats, everything, but it's just it tonally couldn't be more different to the likes of The Exorcist or Rosemary's Baby or Night of the Demon, which is great.
No,
I love it.
What a brilliant category.
My last question for you is going to be, what's your favourite quote? What's your favourite line in the film?
Oh, mate. There's some great quotes. I mean, I think they're both from Christine.
Yeah.
So when she tries to give the button back, I think, and she's digging the grave, she's like, she's finally given the button back. Obviously not the button. She's like, choke on it, bitch. And the way Alison Lohman delivers that line is just perfect.
Yeah.
But ultimately, when her rival in the office is like begging her to not, I can't even remember what he's doing. He's begging her not to rat him out or something.
Yes.
And she's just like, get your filthy pig knuckle off my desk. And it's just one of the greatest.
Pig knuckle.
Get your filthy pig knuckle off my desk.
I love it.
It's amazing. What a line.
I love it.
Alison Lohman, get back on screen.
Yeah, she does an amazing job. She really does.
She's so good.
Rob, thank you so much for joining me.
It's been fun.
Oh, it's been so much fun. What's your favourite occult movie?
Favourite occult movie? It's got to be Rosemary's Baby.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty much everyone said that, I feel. But
it's one of The Exorcist, The Omen. It's one of those three.
I remember the first time I saw that, and just the creeping sense of dread for the whole thing.
Amazing.
My chest was tight, and it's obviously a very different film to this.
Yes.
But yeah,
so
it's amazing.
Good. So good. Lovely. Rob, where can people find you out there on social media, etc.?
Instagram, Twitter, RobWatts88, and WordPress, my blog, Outside of a Dream. That does need a bit of an update. I should probably write something soon.
Yes, get on it.
I will.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
I'm deadly serious.
Hello everybody. Now the clip you just heard there was of course from Bong Joon-ho's Best Picture winner, Parasite, one of the best films of last year, and the Academy actually got it right because they awarded it Best Picture, and Bong Joon-ho Best Director. Very, very exciting. Now we got a lot of requests from people on Patreon and on social media to discuss and cover and review Parasite, so that is exactly what we've got going on over on Patreon this week. I sat down with friend of the pod, Mike Lee Graham, and we discussed Bong Joon-ho's Parasite in depth. It is a full spoilerific discussion, and if you sign up to our Patreon, you can hear that as well as a whole bunch of other really fun bonus episodes. In fact, last week I also sat down with Stevie Webb and Becky Dark, and we discussed Wes Craven's New Nightmare in depth, which was a hell of a lot of fun as well. So there's a whole bunch of really fun bonus episodes and bonus reviews and discussions over on Patreon. If you want to get involved, then you simply need to sign up and donate $5 per month. That's very, very little. That's about £3 British and 80 pence in order to help support the making of this podcast. And you will be treated to all of this weekly bonus content, as well as a whole bunch of other special treats. If you're UK based, you'll also be sent an Evolution of Horror sticker, and everybody who signs up to the podcast will also get a very special shout out as a thank you on the podcast. Speaking of, I'm going to give everybody who signed up and pledged $5 and joined Patreon in the last couple of weeks. So a big thank you to Joseph Duker, Kat Davies, hey, Emma, Michael Davies, Jan, Liam Clark, Hank Shanklin, Afifa Khan, John Wilcox, Joseph Michael, Laurel Smyde, Nicole Pexon, Josh Tonks, Kimberly Ficara, John Courts, April N, and Chris Verney. A huge thank you to all of those people. And one more time, if you want to get involved, support the podcast and be treated to weekly bonus content, then simply sign up now. Head over to patreon.com/evolution of horror. That's patreon.com/evolution of horror. Okay, let's get into the second half of this week's episode as we do a deep dive of Ty West's House of the Devil. Now, joining me to discuss all things House of the Devil, a returning guest on the podcast. She was here in our zombie series discussing George Romero's Day of the Dead with me. She is a filmmaker, writer, director, producer, podcaster, a whole bunch of other stuff. It is my great pleasure to welcome back to the podcast Kat Davies. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. So lovely to have you back here. So we talked about zombie films last time you were here.
We did.
And we're talking this time about kind of occult movies, Satanism and witchcraft and all that kind of thing. Do you like this kind of subgenre, this kind of area of horror?
I do. I like witches and the occult. I think because that's such an old trope, particularly witches. Mm-hmm. It feels there's still something that you can do with them as a trope that's always fresh, and they come around in like zombie movies or like slasher films. They always come around in cycles, and then there's always a nice batch of interesting ones that comes up, and then they go dormant again when they go out of fashion and everyone's kind of bored.
Yeah.
And then there's a resurgence again. But I think the sort of earlier witch films that I saw as a kid, because I was raised on kind of video nasties and horror films as a little kid with my really irresponsible but lovely parents. So early on I saw more things like Carrie, where the subject of the film is, you know, the witch's curse and menstruation, or the woman as monstrous womb, and then things like Rosemary's Baby and lots of the Hammer stuff, like, well, basically The Devil Rides Out and things like that, which I really like. I really like, and bring more of the ritualistic stuff in, and pentagrams and
Yes.
You know, that was my first experience of the sort of Black Phillip type goat character as part of the trope. So I really like these films. I've got a real fondness for them.
I love that obviously there were so many great ones in the 70s, particularly 60s and 70s. There was like a big boom of them. It did seem to sort of go away a bit in the 80s and 90s, it feels like. And then maybe, you know, I would say from about where we are now, like House of the Devil onwards, it feels like this last 10 years there's been quite a resurgence of like folky, witchy movies, hasn't there? What do you think that is? Is that just kind of the cyclical nature of horror, or do you think there's more to it than that?
I think at the end of the 80s, people got a bit bored of it as a trope. I think because in the 70s there'd been so much with The Exorcist and then The Omen, two really, really great films. But then both of those had sequels and became a sort of franchise, if you like. And, you know, I know lots of people like Exorcist 3, and it does have some great moments, but none of those sequels for either are a patch on the original. And like slashers, people had kind of gotten bored of slashers towards the end of the 80s, and the sequels, which just the degradation of quality and those storylines can be dreadful. I've still got a great fondness for them because, you know, there's great set pieces and deaths, but I think the more things become a franchise, and sort of cynical producers jump onto an idea and just want to spin things out for business, the storylines become shitter and shitter, and then a loyal horror audience just gets bored of seeing that sort of stuff and become a bit more skeptical about it. And I was trying to think back to sort of late 80s witch movies that I like, and there's The Witches of Eastwick, which you've talked about really recently, which I do love. They
kind of go slightly more out of the horror
completely
genre, right?
They do. They've sort of plucked George Miller. Well, apparently George Miller had a really horrible time trying to make that film with lots of interference from the producers, and nearly walked off it. But I love that as a film because the women are so powerful. But then with The House of the Devil, it's weird because I saw it years later on Shudder.
Right.
When I first got my Shudder membership, which was like a free month or 3 months or something that was in a Fright Fest goodie bag. And you just logged in and had a code or something.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, what's this film? And
Yeah.
it was like, oh, The House of the Devil. And just the write-up of it, the synopsis was just like, okay, I think I'm going to really like this film. And then off the back of it, it sort of feels like you have a flurry of films that sort of follow in that tradition. So things like Starry Eyes, which feels like it could be a Ty West film.
It does, yeah.
And Alex Esso feels like a Jocelyn Donahue type.
Yeah.
And Sweet Sweet Lonely Girl, though it's a different sort of film, it looks very similar. It feels very similar. It feels like the filmmaker's gone, oh, I really liked The House of the Devil.
Well, the amount...
How do I make something like that?
Similar to that. And it really does, like... I don't know how responsible House of the Devil is for it, but the amount of like kind of throwback movies, like filmmakers that deliberately make their films look like they were made in the 80s or 70s that follow.
Which I've done, 'cause
everyone
you
does it, and it's cool.
you love
And
it.
you know, from It Follows to The Guest to all of these types of films, and House of the Devil was one of the first examples, wasn't it, to do that? I think
so. It feels like
Grindhouse, maybe Tarantino's
completely,
Grindhouse.
totally. And lots of filmmakers who've clearly gone, I'm really inspired by this kind of film. How did they make it? But how do I do something different with it? You know, it's like anyone who's ever watched Suspiria, including me, and then gone, how do I get that sort of look on it? And we're all a bit like that. Everyone loves their heroes possibly a bit too much and wants to kind of incorporate it in there. But it does feel like it if not started it, it feels like lots of people have discovered how to make a film look that way and feel that way. And it does feel, when I was rewatching it literally last night, it does feel like the kind of film you might have picked up in a video shop as part of your £5 for £5 weekend deal. Along with, you know, Evil Dead, or I always bring it up, The Witch Who Came from the Sea, or was it Necromancy or
Necromantic?
Yeah, Necromantic. And then, you know, like a Frank Henenlotter film in your £5 deal kind of thing. So it feels like it's a film that's very much wears its influences on its sleeve, which I love that anyway. And you can spot little things, but it's really subtle in the way it does it.
It is subtle.
Terms of,
and it feels authentic. It does genuinely feel authentic, doesn't it?
It does, and it's not like, I was discussing this morning, is when you watch it, that there's very little in there other than, you know, the haircuts and the Walkman.
Yes.
We haven't even talked about the plot yet, and I've probably gone on to the design.
No, we'll get into all that, but
But it's quite subtly done. It's not like a Stranger Things in your face.
Not at all.
Here's the posters. Here's every song from the 80s. They're passing a cinema. Here's what's on the marquee. This was probably released. It's probably Back to the Future. Or a Nightmare on Elm Street sequel or something like that. And here's the food carton of the day. Here's a discussion about new Coke or new... Do you know what I mean?
You're so right,
It's so much more subtle than that. It's a haircut, which says it all. It's a Volvo, a shitty Volvo.
Yes. It's a telephone that you need to do the
It's a telephone
dial.
box that's like proper, God, your arm's going to ache after you've dialed a really long number in a different state. You know, it's lots of little subtle things like that. And also the period setting in the house. The house is really great, and that's a house that looks like it was used in the 70s and 80s to make those films. And the production design, it's subtle, and it's not just everything from the 80s, because when you live in a time period, things around you aren't just everything you've bought from that time period.
That's exactly what I thought as well, because there are elements that are 70s, I think.
And bits of 60s too, because they're an older, they're not the family who own the house, but
they will be.
Like,
they will be older, and that's exactly true. And I think that really adds something, because to begin with, it doesn't scream like you say 1983 or whenever it's set. You know, you go, this could be the mid 70s, it could be the late 60s, it could be the early 80s.
Hi, I'm calling in regards to the babysitter flyer posted outside my dorm.
The night's big eclipse is now well underway.
I feel a little weird just dropping you out here, like in the middle of wherever we are.
because I've not been completely honest.
We're from the desert, you know.
You see, we actually don't have a child.
They lied to you. I know. They're liars. Okay, I know you're right. But it's $400. This equals first month's rent and then some, and all I have to do is sit inside and watch TV. This is huge. This one night changes everything for me.
So, The House of the Devil is about a young college girl called Samantha.
Yes.
Who, she's living in dorms. She's got a very sort of... the best way to describe it would be a sort of easygoing, carefree flatmate who clearly likes to enjoy college life. She likes drinking and, dates and things like that.
It's the old sock on the door.
The sock on the door. And you see,
classic.
Poor Samantha trying to get into the dorm and she can't get in because her flatmate has company and she just wants somewhere else to go. So she goes looking for a house that she can rent to sort of have her own space. Mm-hmm. Meets the landlady, lovely Dee Wallace, a bit of...
Yes.
Horror heroes in there to give it an extra bit of cachet. And she basically wants to rent this house, but she doesn't have a deposit. Dee Wallace is like, you remind me of my daughter. I'll waive the deposit, but I do need the rent next week. Yeah. And then as Samantha goes to meet her lovely friend Megan, played by Greta Gerwig.
Amazing.
Greta Gerwig.
Completely forgot this was Greta Gerwig.
I know.
Completely forgot.
Who knew? And she's just talking about how she literally has no money to rent this place and she's desperate for work. And so in the next breath, you sort of see her around the college campus and she sees an ad for a babysitter. She's absolutely desperate for cash. Lovely Megan, Greta Gerwig, drives her over to this weird house in the middle of nowhere that is surrounded by forest and trees. Yeah. And they're both greeted at the door by this incredibly tall, strange man, Tom Noonan from Manhunter and RoboCop 2 and Last Action Hero.
Oh, yeah.
Which is great. And then it sort of transpires as they're walking around the house and trying to get the measure of him and work out if this is actually a safe job or not. He says, "You're not actually here to babysit a kid. I do have a grown-up child." Yes. It's actually... Mother Ullman, my wife's mother, who is described as kind of able-bodied, but we don't really know much else.
No, exactly.
And she's in a room in the house. You probably won't hear anything of her, but this is for her care and protection. So immediately, that's a very strange request. Yeah. But he's so desperate for her to do this job. He offers her $400 for 4 hours work. Yeah. And she's so desperate for that money, she just goes, okay, that's fine. For some reason. You just have to suspend the disbelief. I know that she's desperate, but would I stay in a creepy house that's owned by a creepy guy with some creepy woman upstairs? No. In the real world, that screams someone's going to murder me here. But you do just suspend that disbelief because it's so beautifully told. Megan starts to leave because he doesn't really want anyone in the house and he doesn't want to pay 2 people. And that's really where our character's journey feels like it begins, in the house. And the house becomes a sort of character in itself with her. And that's what she interacts with rather so much than other characters. Yeah. Quite an extended period.
It feels like about the whole really second chunk of the middle chunk of the film is her on her own in that house, right?
It is, yeah. And I was trying to time how long it was before she interacted with another person. Yeah. It was ages, actually.
It's a long time. It really is quite brave in that it just relies on atmosphere.
And meanwhile, outside, her friend Megan is busy trying to light a cigarette and then just suddenly out of nowhere gets her head blown off by A.J. Bowen.
Yes.
Which it's really gruesome and really unexpected.
It is.
It's just like, complete oh my shock. God, they just shot Greta Gerwig in the face.
Yeah.
Literally in the face.
Yeah.
Poor Greta.
Poor Greta
Gerwig. So you just know then from that point as well, there's that dramatic irony. Okay, there's a creepy dude outside this house that's making sure that she stays in there. And you don't see him again for ages either.
No.
So there's that sense of there's threat outside, there's possibly threat inside the house.
And so much mystery. It's like, what is happening? Like, what is the plan?
And what's really in that room?
Yeah.
What's really happening and what's really there. But it's really lovely because it's just her kind of navigating her way around this creepy house, spotting little clues, getting herself comfortable, making herself at home. And something which I've neglected to mention so far is Mr. Ullman, before he leaves the house, he's so insistent on, if you need food, there's a number for the pizza on the fridge.
Yeah.
Don't you dial that for the pizza. Dial that for the pizza. She's ordered this pizza that's been delivered by AJ Bowen, who's brilliant, and also in The Sacrament as well.
Yeah.
And he's in loads of stuff.
He's in loads of stuff, yeah.
He's sort of a bit of indie horror royalty.
Yeah.
She's had this pizza delivered, and she starts, as she's sort of up towards the attic of the house and these rooms with locked doors, she starts to kind of pass out, and the Ullmans have come home. And when she comes to, she's almost naked in her knickers, tied down, bound, gagged in the middle of a pentagram.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, here's where
we go.
So it does feel like there's an extended period of time of a girl just in a house on her own, with the tension beautifully building, actually. And I know there's a sort of perception of it being quite a slow build of a film.
Yes.
But it's really zippy, actually.
Yeah.
It really zips through. So the pacing, though it feels like not a lot happens, it zips through.
Yeah.
It really does. It's like, oh, the film's over already.
Yeah.
How did that happen, sort of thing. There's never a point in that film, and I think it's the fourth or fifth time maybe that I watched it last night. It never feels boring, even though I know what's going to happen.
Yeah, and even though it is relatively low in terms of low on action, it is quite low until the very end, until that last like 15 minutes.
Until the very end,
yeah.
But then it goes bonkers, and you're like, oh, this is kind of creepy and strange. And there just is something really creepy about that ritualistic stuff.
Yeah, there is.
That is really unsettling. And as someone who's not remotely religious, I've always found that stuff kind of creepy, like total without being rude, the total fundamentalist Christian stuff, find that quite scary. And
the opposite.
Totally. I really do, because it feels like all of the sects and cults and all of that kind of stuff. And I remember when I was a kid hearing lots about sects and cults, and that some of the satanic panic stuff as well.
Yeah.
She comes to in the middle of this pentagram, and then the mother is revealed as this sort of quite young looking figure, really, although she's quite disfigured.
Yes.
And so we assume she's some sort of witch or some kind of otherness, some kind of other being.
Yeah, she definitely is coded as like a wicked witch.
Yeah, completely.
Almost.
And then it's revealed basically that the pizza delivery boy who also shot her friend Megan is actually their son. And he's kind of creepy too, and they're all robed. And then she gets to a point where she's running through, is it to the back of the house, and then there's a cemetery.
Yes.
And it's kind of one of the most, the final chilling moments of the film, where Mr. Ullman, though he's basically going to die and he knows it anyway, he's going to be killed, he's going to die. And he basically says to her, you're too late.
Yeah.
That's it. You're too late. Kill me. I don't care. I'm rejoicing because my job here is done. And so instead of shooting him, she puts the gun to her head very suddenly and just kills him. Tries to kill herself. And it's such a what the fuck moment.
That's a real shocking moment, isn't it? Another gun to the head moment.
It really is. But it's a kind of, if I really am done here, and to be honest, if you've been put in that really fucked up situation, you would be inclined to believe them.
Yeah.
Like they're not just completely nuts. Maybe there is really something in this.
Yeah.
And it's done really beautifully, and you don't sort of see it really close up.
No.
There's distance, so you can see that world in that moment. But it is a real, oh my God, she's actually just shot herself.
Yeah.
And then first time I saw it, I thought, that can't be it, because that really can't be it. Because
what a bleak ending that would be.
I was like, what a bleak ending. But then you cut to hospital bed.
Yeah.
And it's even more bleak.
Bleaker. Yeah, it's so true.
You then find that the poor cow has shot herself. but she's in a hospital bed, head in bandages, and a nurse comes in and she's being cared for, and the nurse says something along the lines of, "You'll be okay, both of you," and pats her tummy.
Yes.
And then you're left with that freeze frame image on screen while the credits come up.
Yeah. What? I mean, that's a good ending, isn't it? It's a nasty, mean-spirited ending.
What can be worse than a woman shooting herself in the head after that kind of experience? I know.
Yeah.
She's the womb for a monster.
Turns out she's been raped, she's still alive, and she's giving birth to the devil or something similar. Yeah.
Completely.
It's nasty. That is a nasty ending, isn't it?
But what I like about it as well, in terms of sort of whether it's the devil, the Antichrist, whatever, we're not seeing a rape or a sexual scene like in something like Rosemary's Baby.
No.
I kind of like that about it, that we're seeing a sort of different a different
well, it's kind of like we know as much as she does, I suppose,
completely.
Don't we kind of come to with her, and there's that moment where we don't find out till the end. It is. So what do you think? So clearly you're a fan of this film, right?
No, I love this film. I love that, and I think part of it is probably the look of it. So from the opening, which is basically this this girl walking around and this beautiful typeface that you've got that feels very of the time, and it's bright yellow. It's very like a film that people in the States might have gone to see at a drive-in or something like that. And it's freeze framed, which is really pretty. I love that. And you can kind of tell it's shot on film as well, although digital's so much better now, but a lot of it done in post to make it look like
film. Apparently it was shot on 16mm.
Exactly. And I think you can kind of tell that as well. I think it does come across, but it's actually more so than the look of it being shot on film. For me, it's more the dissolves. Yeah, the dissolves, the zooms. And the transitions and the zooms that are like, okay, this really feels like it could have been made in that time. Yeah. So it feels, I think you can tell it's shot on film. It's that combination of factors which really makes you feel like I'm really watching this genuine film that I've just found on a top shelf of video. Yeah, it's great. Do you think that does it ever like venture into just style over substance, this film? Because it's so much about that, right? I mean, I think that's the thing that most people talk about when they talk about House of the Devil. It's like, oh, it's that retro looking one. I think, oh God, it's a really tricky one, isn't it? Because I think when I first saw The Witch, I was like, okay, and Robert Eggers has done it again with The Lighthouse, which I much preferred. Actually, it's down there in my little BAFTA screener collection of mountains of stuff, which I think does it a bit more effectively than The Witch. But all of those films that are made to look a certain way and have a particular feel, I guess they'll always have that sort of criticism levelled at them. Yeah, it's true. But it's not like something like Neon Demon, which is also a bit ritualistic and witchy, occulty. But that to me is pure style over substance. Oh God, yeah. Nothing else for me. Me too. People are going to hate me for saying that. But so I think House of the Devil, there is stylistically a lot going on. Yeah. But it's not like there's nothing else to back it up. No. It feels very sort of Hitchcock in terms of building tension and stuff like that. But then it's just a very pretty film as well. But there's a lot going on, and that ending is really, it's a real punch. Yeah. I do think there's something of this film, it's important about the time and place that it's set, I think. Like it starts, doesn't it, with that kind of thing, almost suggesting that what you're about to see is a true story. Yes, which like is really Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like movies like that, which of course it isn't. But and it's kind of an interesting sort of take in a way when you think about it, because there was obviously this whole wave of this, what people call the satanic panic, right, in the 70s and 80s America, where people were, you know, really genuinely worried that there were satanic people sacrificing babies and stuff. And I think most of it was not true. It was kind of conservatives freaking out about stuff that wasn't Christian. Tipper Gore types. Yeah. And it's interesting that this film kind of takes that, in some ways you could say, takes quite a conservative perspective, because it's kind of saying this happened, like here is what we were all scared of in the 80s kind of thing, suggesting that I mean, he's probably doing it slightly tongue-in-cheek, but I think what's interesting about the style is that it could be a film made at that time, when people at that time were genuinely scared of satanic cults and sacrifices and that kind of thing. And in that regard, I think the style is quite
is quite important then to it, you know.
Yeah, and I think how old is Ty West now? I looked this up the other day. I don't think
he's probably really young, is he? I don't know.
I'm not even sure he's as old as me. But he's clearly influenced by that kind of time and that kind of topic, because in The Sacrament as well, which is very...
It's basically Jonestown.
Yeah. Oh my God! Did you see that documentary, the one that Leonardo DiCaprio produced?
Yeah.
Jesus,
I know.
Christ on a bike. I mean,
the documentaries in some ways are better. I found The Sacrament a little bit like, what was the point in it? Because it really did feel like it was just telling Jonestown and nothing else. In a way.
And The Sacrament, when I first watched it, because I saw my introduction to Ty West was VHS, and I didn't really know Ty West is Ty West. And then I remember seeing Cabin Fever 2.
Oh, right, yeah. Is that him?
I think that's him. He's something involved in one of the Cabin Fever films, and again, didn't really register. So then only really, and I love horror, came across Ty West with The House of the Devil on Shudder, then watched The Innkeepers, and then The Sacrament was on Netflix, I think.
And they were the kind of 1, 2, 3 hit. Like, that really made him...
It feels like it,
him, I think particularly House of the Devil and then The Innkeepers made him this kind of quite horror icon at this point, at least amongst horror crowds. I don't think so much mainstream audiences might know him as well as they know Ari Aster, for example.
Exactly, because they weren't those sorts of big box office films that came out at a time when people were seeking out, or distributors were seeking out those kinds of films to try and cash in on. But I remember I wasn't massively impressed by The Innkeepers. Please don't hate me, horror fans.
I love The Innkeepers, but I can see. I think he's quite an acquired taste, actually.
I think he is. But when it came to The Sacrament, I was sort of like, oh, found footage.
Yes.
And the further you get into the film, and again, what he does brilliantly in that, as he does in House of the Devil, is that building sense of dread.
Yeah.
And I still have nightmares about that.
Yeah.
I don't have nightmares about anything in House of the Devil.
Yeah.
I just love it as a film. I think it's a beautifully made film.
It is.
It's a massive achievement. But The Sacrament is the one that I think that's fucked up.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think that all depends on like what scares you more. So that's quite subjective, isn't it?
Completely.
And, no, totally, I get that. And I think House of the Devil is it's got so much, it's like you say, it's a beautifully made film. It's got so much style.
It's a really amazing film, and I just think, I know it wasn't his debut. Was it The Roost?
Yeah, he'd done a couple of stuff earlier, but this was his breakthrough, really, in terms of horror.
And I think you can see it. Yeah. It's just so beautiful. I think for that time, I can't think of anything else around sort of 2010, 2011. If I think of what else came out around that time that I enjoy as much.
Yeah.
For a rewatch.
Totally. It's lovely to watch. It is the music, the cinematography.
Oh, it's lovely. And just the tinkering on the piano at tense moments, and then they sort of hit an enharmonic note.
Yeah.
And it's like, ooh, that's kind of creepy and unsettling. And it does get under your skin. It reminds me of... it kind of reminds me of The Omen in some ways, because to me that's a horror film without being a horror film in some ways, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
It feels more like a psychological thriller at certain points, which I really like.
Yeah, the film it reminds me of in terms of its look and atmosphere is Black Christmas as well.
Yeah, totally Black Christmas.
That university, those shots of the campus at the beginning and the kind of the bells, and there's a moment when you hear like what sounds like a Christmas song being played as well, and it really reminded me of Black Christmas, obviously until the sort of second half. But yeah, that kind of like creepy, almost like kind of ghost story kind of atmosphere it has.
Yeah, it is.
Before we start seeing all the satanic stuff happen, obviously.
Completely,
but until then, it is more this like kind of this kind of creeping dread that builds and builds throughout, isn't it?
And
it's
I think
lovely.
like with The Innkeepers, he makes those buildings a sort of ghost-like presence in themselves, even though in House of the Devil it's not about the house, it's about what's in the house and who those people are and what they want, and the moon and the pentagrams and the blood and all of that.
It's great.
But he uses those buildings really, really well.
What do you think of Jocelyn Donoghue then, as our sort of heroine, as our final girl?
I think she's doing what she needs to do
Yeah.
as an actress with that character.
Yeah.
She doesn't have a lot of other people to interact with.
No,
as
she
we've
has to
said,
do a
for
lot
very
on her
long.
own.
She has to do a lot on her own. But part of that is she's just nice, isn't she?
Yeah, yeah.
And she just needs the money, and she's extremely pretty.
Yeah.
Like, extremely pretty.
Yeah.
But if I step away from that film and I try to remember her as an actress, I don't particularly. I think I remember Alex Esso more in Starry Eyes.
Yes.
Because it feels like she has an awful lot more to do.
There's a bit more character there.
Yeah, there's a bit more nuance there. There's a lot more to do in that film.
Totally. I think in House of the Devil, she is an archetype. Like, she is the final girl. She's sweet, virginal,
she's there for
sensible.
a purpose, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't mind that so much.
Yeah,
I should do. I probably should do. I have this debate a lot with people about final girls in particular films, and maybe I should be more bothered by it, but I'm not really.
No, I mean, I think the characters in these types of horror films, they do serve a purpose more than they are like real people, I think, you know, whether it's the killer characters or it's the hero or it's the best friend or it's the promiscuous roommate or whatever it is,
they're
you know.
All there for, they're all there.
They're
for
kind
a
of
reason.
slasher type archetypes, aren't they?
Completely. And I think like Tom Noonan's really feels like more of the star of that film, because he's just such a creepy guy.
He's got a great voice, hasn't he?
He does, doesn't he?
Have you ever seen, there's a really weird film that not many people have seen, made by Charlie Kaufman, called Anomalisa. Have you seen that? Do you remember
I've
how
seen
he
that
does
film.
the voice of every single character? He's the voice of every single... There's one guy that does the voice of all the characters, and then obviously there's that one Anomaly character who is Jennifer Jason Leigh. But every single puppet is Tom Noonan.
I really like that film.
It's a really good film.
I just love Charlie Kaufman stuff.
Oh, it's amazing, absolutely amazing. And
I really love his stuff.
I love him, and I love that film. And not many people talked about it when it came out, but it's so weird and creepy and funny and sad. But yeah, that's Tom Noonan, who basically plays every single character in that.
He's when he opens the door and he's just met with Jocelyn Donahue and little Greta Gerwig, and they're clearly like 5 foot, if that.
Yeah.
And he just towers above them, and the angles that Ty West has picked just make him look even taller.
And he's not like really, really overtly menacing. Like, he's kind of friendly and bumbly and nervous himself, isn't he?
Yeah.
And he's got a right balance of like, there's something not right about him, but also like, are his intentions actually this bad, or is he worried about something himself? Like, you don't quite know to begin with, which I like.
And he does have that sort of it's a really interesting one as well, because he's got that sense of he's slightly henpecked almost by his wife.
Exactly.
And there's a moment where he's sort of talking to Samantha, and he's like, my wife just gets on edge. And it's the way he says it, like, she's the one that I'm worried about. I need to make her happy.
And
this
his
is
mother
to keep my
as
wife
well.
and the mother.
He's basically, there's a certain amount of Norman Bates about him.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, completely.
How Norman
Yeah.
Bates is before he's revealed to be the killer is that kind of like quite emasculated guy, isn't
and
he?
that feels like the theme that comes up in Witches and Woman as Witch movies anyway, is that they're kind of these oddly grotesque figures who are there
to castrate men
and stop them getting hard-ons or make penises disappear in some films.
Exactly.
So that it feels like that's what their role is, and his character kind of complies with that he is emasculated by them in that sort of way, and henpecked. So he's just kind of as weirded out and nervous in some points, but excited because he has a job to do. And that is, let's get a baby in that woman. Basically.
Totally. What about Greta Gerwig then? I mean, how weird to see now that we know she is this filmmaker with 2 Oscar-nominated films under her belt. What do you think of her in this? I mean, it kind of feels like quite a fitting film for Greta Gerwig in some ways. Oh, you're wearing a Greta Gerwig t-shirt.
I'm literally wearing my Girls on Top Greta Gerwig t-shirt.
Love it.
I just love Greta Gerwig, and I can't remember I think it was probably Frances Ha was the first thing I saw her in.
Yeah.
Not long after that came out, and it had like a really tiny release.
Yeah.
And I just love her. I just really love her, and it's kind of funny when you now see her in really tiny roles like this, but she's still really quite magnetic on screen, because she's very pretty, but in a sort of weird way. I don't know why.
She has that kind of like
character actress beauty about
there's
her.
That
kind of young Meryl Streep in some ways.
And there's something of somebody like Alison Hannigan for me about her as well, in the way
very
she
sort
talks.
of cutie geeky,
Yeah.
sort of that
Cutesy.
weird offbeat.
Cutesy and kooky. There's definitely, and this
kooky,
is what a lot of
definitely.
people that don't like Greta Gerwig and Greta Gerwig films don't like about it.
Who are they?
I know, it's that
Who
kookiness.
are those people?
It's that opening of Frances Ha, her playing a ukulele, and,
Yeah,
like
she's-
that
I
kind
just-
of like quite hipster, I suppose.
And I suppose because she came out of that sort of almost mumblecore time period, which is not necessarily that helpful, I suppose.
It's totally mumblecore, and actually, I've seen people talk about this film as mumblecore, and I
I've read
read a
that
review
too.
that used the term mumblegore, and that they said that there's this kind of like horror arm of mumblecore, which is really interesting. I never really thought of it, but I think that's true. In that there's
well,
a
definitely
kind of
creep and creep too,
Oh,
definitely, because they're
More
the
so.
masters of kind of
more so,
mumblecore, yeah.
I would say, but I can see what people mean by this, and maybe it is because Greta Gerwig's in it, but there is that certain element of mumblecore about the characters and the way they interact, and how a huge chunk of this film is just people just hanging out,
just hanging out, yeah.
Not really much happening, you know.
And I think it's really weird now knowing that it's Greta Gerwig, isn't it?
Yeah.
But when she's just sat there in one of the earlier scenes when Samantha's talking about this house that she's found and she's broke, and Greta Gerwig's just stuffing her face with pizza.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's beautiful, interesting Greta Gerwig just eating a pizza in a scene. And then she doesn't do, then in another scene, it's an interesting choice, but she's in the house with the Ullmans and with Samantha after sort of going there to drop off Samantha and make sure she's all right, and she's just sat in a room on her own sort of eating snacks, and she's really funny, just like picking something up and eat it, and you're like,
there's little nuances.
what an odd inclusion to keep that in, just Greta Gerwig eating some peanuts or Bombay mix, whatever it is she's having.
I think that is what makes it feel a bit mumblecore in that interesting way, but also she is really interesting for her role, which is fairly minor, and she is just the friend who is concerned about her friend, but she is very watchable and magnetic. Like, you can see why she's become the person she's become in a way.
And she's there as well to serve a purpose. She's the death.
She's the death because
that catches you a bit off guard. You're like, oh, he's literally blown her head off. You're like, what the fuck?
I think that's
blown her head off.
I think that's an important moment, isn't it? Because like, I think if you didn't have that, there would be so little horror until the last 15 minutes.
Yeah,
like
you need
pacing wise, structure wise, I think it's really good to have that really shocking smash like in the about midway through the film, isn't it? To sort of say, oh, by the way, everything isn't okay here. You know,
you do, and then you've got that sense of threat of he's somewhere outside the house, or maybe in the house, or who is it? And it just adds an extra sort of string to Ty West's bow when he's trying to tell that story. But you're right in that, you know, there's not a lot of horror until the end.
I think it's good. I think it's good that it adds that in, because you go, whoa, what the fuck? You know, it's so shocking and so sudden and so gory, like you said. It is like, whoa, what are we watching here?
Yeah,
kind of
completely.
thing. Where's
it's
this
like,
going?
I've just been rocked into a different sort of film.
Yeah, all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Which I love. And, you know, the little details like the fact that we see Greta Gerwig eating pizza.
Yeah.
And then obviously the pizza becomes very important later on in the film.
Yeah.
And there are quite a few little things like that, like callbacks. Like you talked about how Tom Noonan is very adamant about this is the number that you order the pizza from. And he talks about it again. And then he goes, oh, hang on, did I already mention that? And again, it kind of is in fitting with his character, who is this slightly nervous, bumbly man, but also obviously that's so important later on.
Yeah, and because he knows what they need to do, and it's no mean feat, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
to be honest,
it's great, and I love scripts that have that. There's like, I think Get Out is an amazing example of that, where every line, every setup is paid off in the second half. Every throwaway line means something else,
and the more you
will be important
it,
later on. I love that about Get Out, and I think this has a bit of that too. Like, you know, little moments, like you say, Greta Gerwig eating the pizza at the beginning, or whatever it might be, little phone calls or little throwaway comments come back later on.
It's kind of all there.
Yeah,
it's all there.
Yeah,
I think it's a really great film for that, and there's, because of that sort of resurgence that we've got now of witchy films and folk horror films and all of that, which that'll end pretty soon.
Yes, totally.
Right? It's probably coming up to the end of its time again.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, we'll go back to slashers or something soon. You know,
I want more body horror. I'm like, Just give me more Cronenberg stuff.
There's that new Brandon Cronenberg film, which everyone's raving about right now. So here we go. Very excited.
Strap yourself in.
Very excited.
So that's kind of what I'm hoping will come up. I mean, either that or there'll be more psychological horror again. I know there's a couple of good debut films coming out this year that are more sort of psychological horror.
Yeah.
Not necessarily meta, just psychological horror.
And obviously, you know, a lot of kind of political Get Out, kind of Trump era horror as well.
Yeah, do you know what's really... I was thinking about that the other day, is things like The Dead Zone. And I love The Dead Zone. It's a very un-Cronenberg
yes, it is.
film.
Yes.
But I still love it.
Quite un-Stephen King in a way
very,
as well.
Yeah. It's like two people you wouldn't expect to do that kind of thing brought together to make something
really
that neither of them would do without the other, basically.
And Martin Sheen. I mean, it's great. It's so good.
My God.
And Christopher Walken. Yeah, not enough people talk about that film.
So I'm totally expecting more of that.
Yes.
Bojo and Trump inspired kind of stuff. I really am, because we're all, everyone that's trying to write something that's just beyond what's on the page. You're always influenced by what's kind of going on around you.
Yeah. So just to briefly wrap up the film, they get to that final act, and again, you know, you mentioned this earlier, you're not a religious person, no, but do you still find stuff like this scary? We suddenly revealed that we've got pentagrams and we've got people in robes and we've got the devil, and I guess this film is very much saying, right, that this is real, that the devil is real.
Basically, yeah. And I think I do get scared by these kinds of things. So my grandmother was from a weird background, sort of part Jewish, but it was never really talked about. Yeah. Almost like the family had kind of fled. But then later on they became Baptists instead, and then later in her life she was a spiritualist. So we lost one of my cousins quite young. I think he was 21 or something, and then she'd go to see spiritualists and mediums and things like that, and I don't buy into any of that kind of stuff. Whatever makes people happy, fine. Apart from Jonestown, whatever makes...
Well, as long as they're not hurting other people.
Exactly, or trying to do that. But I do find these kinds of films quite scary. I think it is because of those old Hammer horror films, basically. Yeah. I think they set it up really, really well, and things about symbols as well, and like private languages and things that you can't quite understand.
Yeah, and it's interesting that horror, as this what usually is quite counterculture related and usually a little bit more left leaning, I suppose. Yeah. That often actually they do still jump on those kind of bandwagons, like you know, again, this Satanic Panic was ridiculous and wrong, but a lot of horror films did jump on that and go.
They really did.
You know, what's really interesting about occult movies that we've been discussing is that The Exorcist, The Omen, Rosemary's Baby, all these films that are brilliant films, they are all very much saying like God is good, the devil is bad, Christianity good, devil bad. Like they all have that message, and the House of the Devil kind of does too, which is just quite interesting. But again, it's very much deliberately a throwback.
Yeah, and there's just that sort of good and evil, which is
makes a great
who's
story.
Good and who's evil, and one side versus the other kind of it's just one of those old storytelling.
Exactly, it works beautifully as a story always. You know?
It does, but I do find these films quite scary. It is the ritualistic thing. It is that ritualistic element that I think makes them scary now.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So would you still recommend House of the Devil to people that haven't seen it?
Yeah, get a Shudder subscription and watch it, or try and buy it on DVD. I'm pretty sure you can buy it on DVD and Blu-ray.
Yeah, totally.
You must be able to.
Oh yeah, you can. And it is it's just a beautifully paced film, I think, isn't it?
It is.
It's
it
so
really
lovely
is.
And simple.
It really is. It's
holds up.
It's a real achievement, I think, for an indie film.
Yeah.
I think it really is a real achievement, and things that have followed it since, like Sweet Sweet Lonely Girl, which is also on Shudder. I'm not getting commission from Shudder.
Yeah, I know. I love this. Yeah.
There's just so much great stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's comes since that. I love it as a film. I was really excited, like when you said the topic, and I just instantly tweeted, "House of the Devil at you! I want to do this."
Yeah, you did. And
I was like, kept emailing, going, "When are we going to talk about when are we going to talk about House of the Devil?"
I know. Well,
but I love it. I think it's one of my favourite sort of witch occult kind of movies. And then The Witches of Eastwick, which you decided to talk about without.
I can't believe.
Which I'm absolutely heartbroken
I didn't know
about.
you were a fan.
I love that film.
What a weird film, though. It is weird.
I love it.
Yeah.
I do love that film. I love it so much, and I think because they're sexy witches.
Yeah.
And Jack Nicholson's just amazing.
Yeah.
I know you've already talked about that film.
No, he's great. I mean, it's great.
I won't waste the time for you on it, but I actually really love it as a film for all of its weirdness and grotesque vomiting deaths.
Oh,
and
the cherries. The cherries are still gross.
And he goes, have another cherry.
Yeah.
It's absolutely, it's just disgusting.
Well,
I just love it.
You might have answered this already then, but my final question for you was going to be, what's your favourite occult movie?
Oh, I'm not sure.
I mean, there's so much.
You know what? If I'm going on the psychological dread, I think House of the Devil is great for that. If I want a fun occult film, it's The Witches of Eastwick.
Yeah.
But then if I want something that sort of goes beyond just being a horror film but has those deaths in it, is probably The Omen.
Oh, The Omen is a perfect film. Yeah.
It is, yeah. And I was talking about this to another podcaster the other day.
How dare you?
I know, how dare I cheat on Evolution of Horror. But talking about The Omen, and because it feels like it's the horror film that sets up set pieces in films.
I mean, like it's Final Destination, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Totally, yeah. It's totally Final Destination, and it feels like all of the slashers post that took on that kind of way of telling the story. And here's a death, and 15 minutes later there's a death,
the next
and 15
one,
minutes
and how much more inventive can we get with the death?
Completely. But the dread from the minute that film opens with that score, and you see Damien and his shadow is, a cross, and you're like, oh shit, this is really full on.
Incredible.
And then the sort of assisted suicide of the nanny, who then crashes through the window on top of just hanging herself from a roof. It's so full on. And then the 18 million angles of the head being sliced off.
So good. So good.
So I think possibly that.
Yeah.
And
good
that's
choice.
a really, really zippy film that when you come away from it, you're like, God, so much goes on. Is that 3 hours? But it's not. It's an hour and 51.
No, it's amazing. It zips along. It's brilliant.
So I think possibly The Omen, but then I remember, I'm really waffling on now about the occult films.
You're only supposed to have one choice,
I know, but I remember doing film studies and being a sort of film school type wanker and watching silent films from like George Méliès and witches and stuff like that. And they're really
we've covered some of those on this series. Yeah, there's some amazing stuff. Yeah,
they're really impactful. Probably The Omen, but if I want fun and a thrill ride, then The Witches of Eastwick.
Nice.
Because I feel like I can relate to those female characters a bit more than most films.
Yeah.
Most of those films.
Excellent choices.
You're going to edit that to like 2 seconds where I go, The Omen.
Amazing. Kat, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been so much fun. If people want to come and find you out there and have a go at you about all your views on all these films, where can they find you on the internet?
Oh God, I've got a website. It's just literally catdavies.com, CATDAVIES.com, and I'm on Twitter as @KittyQuantro. Try and work out how to spell that.
Yeah, good luck everybody.
And I've got Bloodshed, which is a short I co-wrote and produced, and that's now on Amazon Prime.
Lovely.
And Connie, a short that I made a couple of years ago, that's now on iTunes.
Amazing. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a big thank you to my 2 brilliant guests, Kat Davis and Rob Watts. So please do get in touch. What do you think of this week's films? Are you a fan of Drag Me to Hell and of House of the Devil? They're both really popular generally amongst horror fans, but do you agree, or do you think they're a bit overrated? Please do get in touch. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and on Letterboxd. If you want to discuss this week's movies and anything else horror related with fellow listeners, then join our discussion group. That's called the Evolution of Horror Discussion Group, and that can be found on Facebook. If you want to support this podcast and be treated to weekly bonus episodes, then sign up now to our Patreon. Head on over to patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. You can find all previous episodes and seasons of this podcast on our website. Simply go to evolutionofhorror.com. You can find this podcast on all major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Podbean, Acast, Stitcher, Libsyn, and Spotify. If you haven't done so already and you get a chance, please do spare a minute to drop us a little rating or review on Apple Podcasts, preferably a positive one. It will really help the podcast get discovered by new listeners, and I will be forever grateful. Okay, that's it for this week. Moving on to next week then, part 18. Next week, we're hurtling into another witchy double bill. Two of the most recent witchy classics to come out of this decade. In the first half of this episode, I'm going to be joined by brand new guest Rowena Alice, and we are going to be discussing Anna Biller's bonkers, unique witch movie, The Love Witch from 2016. And then things are going to get much scarier in the second half. In the second half of the episode, I'm going to be joined by Rihanna Dillon, and we are going to be discussing that terrifying modern masterpiece, one of the scariest witch movies of recent years, The Autopsy of Jane Doe. Both these discussions will be spoilerific. Give them a watch ahead of next week if you dare. Join us next week for all of this and more on the evolution of horror.